In Ted Hughes's Bayonet charge, the poem's opening, which begins mid-action with the word suddenly, immediately throws the reader into the chaotic experience of war. By starting mid-action, the poem reflects the soldier's own confusion and the unpredictability of battle. In a poem about the indescribable horror of war, the decision to start mid-action means there's no time to work out what's happening. Just as the soldier is thrown into a terrifying situation without warning, the reader is also thrown into the middle of the action, helping us to get a glimpse of the true horrors of war. Look at Hughes's use of repetition here. Suddenly he awoke and was running raw in raw-seamed hot khaki. The idea of running raw in raw-seamed hot khaki seems like a poor piece of writing. As a teacher, I would be asking my student to replace one of the repeated words if they presented this to me in a creative writing piece. However, it was clearly a deliberate choice by Hughes. Now, when a poet repeats themselves, it can be used to show their difficulty in expressing the moment. A little while ago, when I was talking about Extract from the Prelude, we saw the same thing with a huge peak black and huge. A poet with an immense vocabulary chooses to repeat themselves at a time of great stress. So Hughes's use of repetition reflects the shock the soldiers experienced upon waking. It's as if he's stuttering, struggling to articulate the moment, and this interpretation would fit in with the theme that war is so horrific, the poet's unable to clearly express the moment, forced instead to stutter and repeat himself. Take a look at all of the similes contained within Bayonet charge. Yes, that's 6 similes we find within the poem, virtually one in every sentence. Now, each simile can be analysed individually, but let's stop and think about the combined effect of a simile-ridden poem. What is a simile? It's the comparison of one thing to another. Essentially, a simile can be seen as a poet saying, I cannot explain this, but I can liken it to something else. In other words, I don't know how to actually describe this moment. The best I can do is to compare it to something which I can describe. Now, if a simile is used to make something understandable, then perhaps the thing being written about itself is impossible to describe. So we can add the overwhelming use of similes to the list of devices employed by Hughes to express the sheer horror of war. A horror so terrifying it cannot be fully articulated. The events and feelings are so beyond ordinary experience that the poet has to use these comparisons just to get close to the truth. In Remains, Simon Armitage employs a number of structural devices to present the true horror of war. Like we saw in Bayonet charge, the poem begins mid-action. On another occasion, we get sent out. The reader's immediately confused, not fully aware of the situation taking place. If this is another occasion, what were the previous ones? Who's speaking? This deliberate choice to start the poem with the suggestion that something's gone before helps the reader to understand the uneasiness the soldiers would have felt joining a war zone. Nothing is neatly controlled and organised, everything is chaos. Also, this opening mid-action not only throws the reader into the chaos of the situation, but also reflects the disjointed nature of the soldiers' memories. By beginning abruptly, Armitage shows how traumatic memories often reappear abruptly. The lack of a clear beginning or end to the poem reflects the soldier's ongoing struggle with his memories, the remains that are left behind in his thoughts. Armitage employs repetition for effect in the poem in the lines, well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire. The repetition of somebody else is here used to deflect the blame from the speaker alone. He wants to make it clear that others were involved, and syntactically the line now becomes dominated by the others because he mentions somebody else twice and himself just once, suggesting the speaker wants to believe that he himself was not the main culprit. And notice the vagueness of the phrase somebody else. It's not as if the speaker says myself and Tom and Sarah. By referring to the other soldiers with the vague language of somebody else, Armitage presents the dehumanizing aspect of war. By reducing the other soldiers to somebody else, the speaker distances himself from them and the actions they committed together. However, there's a shift at the end where the speaker explains his bloody life in my bloody hands, and the use of the pronoun my marks a change in the soldier's view. The poem ends with the acknowledgement that the speaker is now taking responsibility. The suffering of war is presented here. It might have been a joint decision to shoot the looter, but the reality is that at home again, the soldier deals with the consequences alone. So the repetition of the collective responsibility early in the poem, when compared to the singular acceptance at the end, presents the message that the individual suffering of war is inescapable. When Armitage describes the memory of the looter being stuck in the soldier's head, he uses the metaphor dug in behind enemy lines. In military terms, being dug in behind enemy lines means being trapped deep in enemy territory, somewhere very dangerous, and this metaphor shows how the soldier's memories are stuck in his mind, just like soldiers stuck behind enemy lines, and both are dangerous positions to be in. Even though the soldier is now at home on leave, he can't escape these memories. The metaphor highlights how the suffering of war has impacted him. It shows that the suffering isn't something he can simply forget once he's back home. Instead, the memories are so deeply embedded in his mind they feel like a continuing battle. Using this war image whilst he's at home on the domestic front symbolises how the effects of war are not left behind when soldiers return to their everyday lives. His mind remains caught in the conflict, showing how powerful the impact of war can be.